Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is my buddy Bill Demain. He's going to talk about an article he's writing for Classic Rock Magazine about Elton John.
Currently, I'm working on a special issue magazine that's being published by Classic Rock out of London, England, as a tribute to Elton John. So everything in this magazine will be about Elton, from the beginning to the present tense. And happily, I was assigned two things. One, which was to write about all of the records he released during the 1970s, which is his kind of golden period. And it's amazing to revisit those things. First, because he was so prolific. He put out 16 albums in 10 years. And I mean, really not a bad one in there, you know? And the second thing that I'm writing about for this special issue is the co-writing relationship between Bernie Taupin and Elton John. And I think it's I kind of knew some of this stuff, but like having an assignment to write about it, you kind of go back in. And so I'm reading his autobiography, Me, which is very good. And then this book called Captain Fantastic about Elton in the 70s. And Elton John and Bernie Taupin met through an ad in the NME. In 1967, Liberty Records placed an ad and said, talent wanted, songwriters, singers, musicians, anybody, like if you have what it takes, one of those kind of classic 60s, cattle call things. And Elton at that point was not Elton yet. He was Reg Dwight. And he had been, since he was a teenager, he was playing in bands. He played with a group called Bluesology, and then he played with Long John Baldry, who was kind of a blues screamer. But he was kind of getting itchy, like he didn't want to just be a background musician. So he showed up at Liberty Records, and classic kind of old school audition. There was a piano there, and he sang He'll Have to Go by Jim Reeves, and he sang Mammy by Al Jolson, just to like show his range, And then I think a rock and roll song like a Jerry Lee thing or something. But he was obviously, he was, from the time he was a little kid, he was already good. He was a prodigy on the piano, self-taught and a good singer. But the problem was the way he looked. He was chubby, short hair, big spectacles. And the Liberty guys are like, this kid is talented. He was only 19, but he just doesn't look the part, So they tried to get some interest. Like, I guess they took, he made a little demonstration record and they took it around and to the other people at the label. It's like, no, we can't. But he's good. Like, he's got a lot of talent. And I guess he played him one of his songs too, that like very early on, that was unformed. So this guy at Liberty Records named Ray Williams, who was in charge of the publishing division, said, even though we can't get anything going for you, I have this sheaf of lyrics that were sent in from some kid in Sheffield or Bournemouth, England. I've never met him, but they're good, I think. It's like they're poems. So why don't you take those? And that kid was a farm boy named Bernie Taupin. And Elton wrote 10 songs from those lyrics before he even met Bernie Taupin. And he said right from the beginning, as soon as he looked at them, it just sort of unlocked something in him. It was like he looked at the lyrics and melodies came to him, unfailingly so. So after about 10 songs, the Liberty Records guy contacted Bernie Taupin. And I don't know, in those days, I guess maybe a phone call or maybe it was like a letter, you need to come to London and meet this guy, Reg, who I think So they met for coffee and they hit it off. And they figured, since they were already collaborating in this way where they weren't in the room together, like in a classic co-writing situation, like, what do you think of this? Boon for June, how about this chord? They continued and have continued to this day to write a part. Bernie writes a lyric, gives it to Elton. Elton takes it away, puts it on the piano, writes the tune. So it's interesting. I can't really think of many other songwriters who have that sort of I'll wash you dry approach, kind of thing. I think that Bernie and Elton established that working method early on is remarkable and that they stuck to it. And they were so prolific. It was just, early on, I think even before Your Song, which was the kind of breakthrough song, they had written 100 songs. That's a lot. And it was also interesting, too, that I don't think there's anything comparable in rock history where there's a songwriting duo that's well known for writing hits, and the lyricist is not in the band, but he still goes on tour with the band, which I think gave Bernie a really interesting kind of camera-like view, because Elton got famous pretty quickly. After the second or third record, he was on the way up, and Bernie was on the bus with them and going to all the gigs. So he got to experience the fame without, he could still live a regular life. And when you start to listen to a lot of especially on Madman Across the Water, which was the fourth album, there's a lot of songs that are kind of like a diary of touring America, Razorface, about meeting a homeless guy, Bernie was able to give Elton a way to sing about things he was experiencing without getting, Elton wasn't a lyricist, but Bernie almost could write about fame and the strangeness of everything at a remove. I think on Honky Chateau, they recorded 3 or 4 albums in a row, significantly Honky Chateau and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which was the masterpiece, They recorded at the Chateau d'Aroville outside of Paris. It was an old 18th century castle recording studio that Bowie had worked at, and Pink Floyd and Jethro Tull. And they would go there and just stay and hire a chef. And famously, Elton, they had a breakfast area, and Elton and Bernie would come down in the morning, and Bernie would put a lyric on the piano, and Elton would write a song while the band was having breakfast. And then they would learn it, record it, and by the end of the day have mixed it. Every song on Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was conceived, written, and recorded that way. I know. Over the course of 2 weeks. And that record is to my mind, not many double albums really justify their length, the White Album for me does, and maybe XL on Main Street, but there's very few. But to me, I'll say that I think Goodbye Yellow Brick Road is the best double album ever made in the rock. There's just not a bad moment on it,
They did Funeral for a Friend like that?
Yes.
All the music?
Yes.
Wow.
I know, right?
Wow.
But the Elton and Bernie thing also follows. I haven't even seen this movie, Rocket Man. Which is, I'm sure it probably has its moments, but it's like the Queen movie. It probably mixes up the timeline and stuff and over dramatizes. But there is no denying that they kind of followed the typical 70s rock star arc, the rise to fame, the money. He sold out Dodger Stadium, is on the cover of Time magazine, and then cocaine. And things start going downhill, So by Blue Moves, which was 1976, another double record that doesn't quite justify its length, there was just, Elton was throwing tantrums, and he was firing people right and left, And then he and Bernie split up for about 4 years, And then they got back together in the 80s. It's remarkable. I can't think of any other team. I guess you could say Jagger and Richards are still together as a songwriting team, although the Stones don't really make that many records. But Bernie and Elton, it's 55 years collaboration.